A while ago, I decided to play all parts of God of War, so I started preparing for this unique video on my channel in order to experience this new adventure with you. Before starting with the first part, I wanted to take a quick look at the history of the studio. I thought I had good knowledge about Santa Monica Studio, but I was surprised to learn that their first game was a bike racing game called Kinetica. I wondered, what does God of War have to do with Kinetica? And the other piece of information was even more shocking than the previous one. The game designer of God of War drew inspiration for the entire game from the Japanese game Onimusha. His idea was to create something similar, but based on Greek mythology, and truly, the saying, "Japan is the origin of games," is accurate. The interesting thing is that Onimusha and Kinetica were released in the same year, 2001, on PlayStation 2. This means that the Santa Monica studio, which took the idea of God of War from Japan and transformed it into Greek mythology, took 4 years to develop. The first installment of the series was released in 2005, but now it's the year 2024, and I didn't play it when it first came out, so I was very excited to experience it. However, I don't own a PlayStation 2, so a friend of mine recommended that I play the remastered version, which includes the first and second parts of God of War on PlayStation 3. The graphics and noticeable changes from the original versions I saw online truly amazed me. I started the game and connected the original controller to the PlayStation 3 to fully immerse myself in the experience. The game started with a person who had muscles, was white in color, and wanted to commit suicide. I didn't know why. Suddenly the game took me back in time 3 weeks, and I found myself on a ship facing monsters. The game asked me to press triangle and square, and I didn't know that these two moves would become addictive for the next 9 games. Yes, 9 games, don't be surprised. The interesting thing is that the game immediately throws me into battle. I found myself confronting a huge monster that drew me into a time-layered story. It was a captivating story with intriguing details that made me excited for the ending. Kratos, a person who abandoned his free will, made himself a servant of the god of war, Ares, in exchange for being saved from death and defeat. Indeed, Kratos is a man who doesn't like to be defeated by anyone, but Ares, on the other hand, wants absolute loyalty from Kratos. So he made a very foolish decision and bestowed this weapon upon Kratos. Ares then made Kratos unknowingly kill his wife and daughter, and that's where the story of revenge begins. In the first part, literally everything was perfected. The combat system, puzzle solving, and the way quick commands appeared. This is what truly distinguished this series from other games, and I was honestly amazed at how the designer was able to draw inspiration from and imitate the concept of another game and create a product with such mastery. In the first part only, Kratos didn't leave the matter until he defeated Ares and took his place. As for the second part, it was released only 2 years later in 2007, but I played the remastered version. Everything was better, and I honestly can't find words to describe my admiration for the graphics quality. I started playing the game, and indeed, if there's one thing this series has proven, it's its mastery in legendary beginnings. When I think of this part, the first thing that comes to mind is battling this leader. Then I was surprised by Kratos, who can't calm down a bit. He is a person who naturally seeks trouble as he invaded city after city until Zeus angered him, and he ended up killing him. Here I witnessed the biggest lie in the history of the gaming world. It is that Kratos refuses to die and emerges from the depths of the earth to return to life once again. And at that moment, Kratos heard a strange voice, a voice that would ally with him and help him in his struggle against Zeus. And this voice was coming from Gaia, the leader of the giants. She presented a plan to Kratos, unbelievable to the mind. She said he must go somewhere and go back in time. Go back to the moment when Zeus betrayed him and eliminate him. Truly, at that moment, I continued playing for 4 hours because the gameplay with this weapon is enjoyable. Although they gave me new weapons, I always find myself going back to the main weapon, the Blades of Chaos. The weapon upgrade system truly makes you addicted to it and rewards you when you kill more monsters. The magic attacks have changed from the previous part, and the most beautiful ones were the earthquake and electricity. Even the level design relied on the grandeur of the scenery and visual spectacle. When I played the later parts, I discovered that there was something unique about the first and second parts, and unfortunately, it was lost in the rest of the parts. It was the excessive bloodiness when killing monsters and bosses. After playing a lot and reaching the end of the second part, I was truly shocked by the power of the events. Just like the shock Zeus experienced when he saw Kratos appearing again from a temporal energy. Here I started a long fight with him, but unfortunately the ending was unsatisfactory, and it felt like one of the most annoying endings in the entire series. It was like cutting the story in half. I don't know how those who finished it at that time felt, having to wait until 2010 for the release of the third part. But luckily, I didn't have to wait all that time, and immediately after buying the third part, I inserted it into my PlayStation 3 to experience the true adventure. I started playing, and oh my, what a shock I had from the graphics quality, especially since I had been playing old parts for almost 10 days. I noticed the significant leap made by the third part very clearly, and its beginning was no less luxurious, but even more luxurious than everything that came before. Kratos on the back of Gaia, ascending Mount Olympus, looking at Zeus. Meanwhile, Zeus was standing with his group, wielding their swords and weapons, looking down and motivating them to fight. The sound effects in the game made the scene pulsate with horror and created an unforgettable and truly authentic beginning. It is evident that the studio truly understood the subject matter. The fights I enjoyed the most were in the first two parts. They were with bosses larger than me, and this was also implemented with a large number of bosses in the third part. Ironically, I thought the previous parts were gory, but this part is the bloodiest thing I've seen in the gaming world. Especially the scene where Poseidon is killed. It truly horrified me. Seeing the situation from the perspective of the victim is different from seeing it from the perspective of the killer. Even though I finished the third part about 8 years ago, I couldn't stop myself from playing it again because it is genuinely outstanding. It reached the pinnacle of gameplay. Every defeated boss died in the most gruesome ways, and I was supposed to obtain loot from them, whether it was a weapon or a magical move. So I ended up having a huge arsenal, and the character Kratos became more arrogant and proud, reaching his lowest point, which I liked. The ending was very beautiful, and I liked it unlike the second part. However, when I moved on to the next part, I regretted it. I told myself I wish I had played it before the previous parts, because the combat mechanics in the third part ruined the experience of the parts that followed. There is something strange about this part. Although it was released in 2013, its chronological order in the story is before the events of the first part. It starts with Kratos being in prison. He is being tortured by three beings known as the Furies. Their mission is to torture those who have broken their oaths with the gods, and of course, Kratos breaks his loyalty to everyone, so he gets arrested and put in prison. The combat in Ascension is good. It introduced new moves using the chains, allowing me to grab enemies, immobilize them, and strike others. I also gained the ability to use enemies' weapons. The story of Ascension is good, but it was a bit expected. Even if I hadn't played this part, it wouldn't have affected my understanding of the main storyline. It's exactly like the stories of the two spin-off parts that were released on the handheld device called the PSP. Fortunately, they were later released in an enhanced version on PlayStation 3. The weirdest thing is that Chains of Olympus takes place after Ascension, meaning it's also set before the first part, and Kratos was on a mission to save a person named Helios from the underworld, even though the graphics were weaker. However, I found this part more enjoyable than Ascension, while the other part is called Ghost of Sparta. Its story was more entertaining because this time I saw a different side of Kratos as he searched for his brother, although the end of the search honestly wasn't worth it. I liked the new changes that the series made in each new installment. The strangest piece of information that I didn't know was that there was a part released for mobile phones called Betrayal. It was released in 2007, but the phones that can run it are no longer available, so I searched online and discovered that I could play it using a Java emulator. I just had to download the game file and run it on the emulator, and indeed I managed to run it, but I was surprised that the game size was only half a megabyte. The controls were bad and annoying, and half of the screen didn't show up, so I settled for a quick experience. And with that, I have completed all the old parts. And here the game disappeared for 8 years, from 2010 to 2018. It returned after a long absence in a different way, with bold decisions that completely changed the perspective of the game. It became a third-person perspective, and Kratos grew older and became old. At the beginning of the game, he was burying his wife, whom I really don't know when he married. The game was filled with feelings of love and sadness, instead of violence and hatred. This was something that fans of this series were not accustomed to, including myself. The reckless Kratos was gone and replaced by the wise old man. The question here was whether the Santa Monica studio could succeed with all these changes. They have written at the beginning of the game a bold new beginning. However, introducing the new weapon, the axe, was a smart idea. That's what attracted me to play this part. Although I didn't like some of the new changes, the fight with the first boss, Baldur, convinced me of the new game system, but I still have a greater love for the old parts, and this includes the part that was released after 4 years, Ragnarök. I liked fighting with all the new weapons except the original weapon, Blades of Chaos. This weapon has been wronged, truly because of the third-person perspective. I think this weapon was built on the old camera system. I can also understand the change that happened to the character Kratos, but the game made him overly peaceful, always seeking peaceful solutions, and this has increased a lot. The game also made Atreus, Kratos' son, playable. They gave him great importance. I expect that the game will eventually replace the character Kratos with his son Atreus in the future, but in the end, I liked this part, and I finished my journey in the expansion, Valhalla. Honestly, my opinion about it is conflicting. It is clear that they liked the idea of the game Hades, which takes place in Greek mythology, and said, let's do something like that. But the beauty of Valhalla is the combat and the excitement. Its ending was that Kratos became a wise man of his time and reconciled with himself. He reached a stage of stability. Overall, I got a result from all these experiences, and I can truly say that Santa Monica Studio is strange. I expect that it is the only studio that succeeded in all its games, and the only studio that doesn't know how to make a failed game. If you've reached the end of the video, I thank you very much for watching. I invite you to subscribe to my channel and share the video with your friends because it was one of the difficult videos to produce. I wish you a beautiful day and see you in upcoming videos.